Dear partners, dear distinguished guests, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's event on behalf of the Armenia Project. As a country director, I'm truly honored that TAP is hosting such an important discussion at the National Library of Armenia. This venue holds a special place as the world's largest repository of Armenia's early printed and rare books, maps, and periodicals, an ideal setting for today's discussion. And to start, I would like to, with a pleasure, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker for the evening, Jean Cavalier, the head of the Eastern Europe and Central Asia desk at Reporters Without Borders, who will join us from Paris via Zoom to share her valuable insights on this critical matter. Jean, can you hear us?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you very much for your invitation. Distinguished guests, experts, and colleagues, it is both a privilege and an honor to welcome you to today's important event organized by the Armenia Project, where we will delve into one of the most pressing challenges facing Armenia's media landscape, the regulation of media in the context of disinformation. Today, Armenia ranks 43rd out of 180 countries in the Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Index, a significant achievement for a country that has emerged from a non-democratic system. However, as many of you know, these advancements come with new challenges. While Armenia no longer faces direct state censorship, the growing issue of disinformation presents a dilemma that has become increasingly pervasive globally. As social media continue to shape public discourse and influence perceptions, we need for regulation that can protect freedom of the press online. Armenia's parliament is currently exploring amendments to its media laws that aim to address this challenge while ensuring the continued independence and freedom of the press. This proposal amendments, they are part of a broader discussion that we will explore today, centered on the concept of self-regulation. This approach, widely accepted in the European Union, provides a framework where media outlets can voluntarily adhere to ethical and transparent practices, helping to foster both trust and accountability in journalism. At the core of our discussions today will be the potential of self-regulation to protect democratic values, uphold journalistic integrity, and contribute to a healthier media environment. As you know, we live in an age where public trust in traditional news platforms is increasingly undermined by misinformation and the rapid spread of unverified content in social media. But we also know that the solution does not lie solely in regulation from above. Instead, the focus should be on empowering media outlets themselves to adopt transparency standards and ethical practices. This brings us to an important tool on this in this ongoing process, the Journalism Trust Initiative, GTI. The GTI, initiated by Reporters Without Borders, offers a structural solution to combat this growing mistrust. It is based on a set of internationally recognized standards that assess transparency and editorial processes in media organizations. By participating in the GTI, media outlets can publicly demonstrate their commitment to high journalistic standards, providing clear signals to stakeholders such as tech platforms, advertisers, and philanthropic donors that they are responsible, reliable, and trustworthy. Through GTI certification, media outlets can gain competitive advantages such as the preferential treatment by search engine algorithms, increased visibility on advertising agencies, and access to philanthropic funding from organizations like the Thomson Reuters Foundation. Additionally, the European Media Freedom Act, alongside initiatives like the Code of Practice on Misinformation, supports the GTI as a benchmark for reliable news, creating a safeguard against arbitrary moderation and content removal on digital platforms. As part of today's event, we will hear from regional and international experts who will help us to understand the potential of self-regulation in promoting transparency and integrity within the Armenian media landscape. We will explore the experience of countries like Ireland and Georgia, which have adopted similar models, and examine the practical steps necessary to implement these standards in Armenia. Our discussions will also focus on the specific challenges Armenia faces in applying these mechanisms in a rapidly evolving digital environment. The conversations we engage in today will shape not only Armenia's media future, but also contribute to a broader global conversation on how to protect and empower the media in the digital age. It is through collaboration, open dialogue, and the sharing of best practices that we can collectively arrive at solutions that promote democracy, foster media trust, and safeguard the integrity of journalism. I encourage all of you to actively engage in today's panel and discussion. Let us come together to explore new ideas, challenge assumptions, and work towards actionable insights that can drive meaningful change. Thank you all for your participation, for your attention, and I look forward to productive and inspiring panels ahead.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you very much for a very insightful talk. I suggest that we start with our first panel, and it is titled, Can Self-Regulation Work in Local Media? What legal framework is needed? This will be moderated by Sean McIntosh, the chair of the multi-platform journalism program at AUA, and joining Sean are our esteemed group of panelists. Susan McKay, Irish Press Ombudsman. Please welcome Susan. Marietta Manatsakanyan, legal expert at the Center for Legislation Development Foundation of the Ministry of Justice of Armenia. Nunes Sarkisyan, managing director at the Media Initiatives Center. Unfortunately, we should have had Ara Ghazarian with us, the media lawyer. Unfortunately, due to his medical issues, he couldn't join us today. So this panel will be female-dominated one, but I am sure it will be very insightful. Sean, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much. So I'd like to just start off right away and start with Nune and asking if you could maybe describe the existing media regulation landscape in Armenia, because I understand there already are self-regulation bodies and this has been going on. So if you could just kind of give us a sense of the context and the lay of the land, that would be great.
I think that we should start with that, although I see that the half of the room are people who are a supporter of self-regulation initiatives here in Armenia and people with whom we have been learning a lot, also from the international colleagues from the international experience, but maybe it's good to start from that, to be on the same line with all of us. So self-regulation system started in Armenia in 2007, and Yerevan Press Club and Boris Navasarjan, who is not here and who should be in my place now and talk about self-regulation, but due to his other work he couldn't do that. So he was the person who actually started this idea here in Armenia. But up to now he thinks, and all of us somehow think, that this is still on an experimental level. And this is the reason maybe that up to now media self-regulation initiative, it's still initiative, but not the legal entity, it's not the separate organization. But this is initiatives which has signees about 85 media outlets, different type of the media in Armenia, including regional, including Yerevan-based, national, etc. So, and this initiative has a group of people who are revising different claims. Self-regulation initiatives has several documents. The main document, it's ethical codes, which is kind of a Bible for us, because this is exactly the document to what we refer when we are doing our decisions regarding the different claims. We have also developing policies within these initiatives, and every year the General Assembly, which consists of all members who signed these initiatives, they are making some changes, and this is the only body which could do these changes. For example, this year we made the changes in the ethical codes and included some provisions regarding the use of the artificial intelligence, which is also very important around the world. We also created a separate document which is regulating the work of the people who are elected as media observatory members itself. So this group of people, which consists of the 15 media experts, media lawyers, people from the media managers, and also representative of the society. So they are actually those group of people who are doing the decisions regarding different claims. And only the claims which are demonstrating different types of the ethical problems coming from different media publications could be for us the reason to make decisions. There are 3 different documents which Media Ethics Observatory could create. The one, it's a judgment, another, it's an expert opinion, and the third one, it's a statement. So maybe I will stop here. I think that it's more or less clear. And if we will have more questions, I will continue. Or maybe you have something.
Let me do a follow-up on that. So if these existing self-regulatory bodies are going on now, what benefit do you think the new media reform law would have? What added?
First of all, this reform came from the ministries and from the government. And in the beginning, we had a serious fight, and I personally was very much against of the state becoming a part of the self-regulation. But it is very important to take into consideration the polarization of the media in Armenia. And this is the reason why the recognition of the self-regulation system by a state and using different incentives to try to support those media outlets who are really aiming to be responsible, be the part of a quality media, be accountable, etc. So this is really important, and maybe this is the way for the solution. By the way, I'm reading the title of today's meeting, which is media self-regulation the answer? And I'm asking myself, answer to what? And maybe today we will try to understand that this is the answer to what. And this is maybe the only reason. And since I told already, and I started from that we still consider those systems which we have, which is, by the way, in my opinion, is sophisticated. And we have all mechanisms which could be a really good tools for the self-regulation work of the self-regulation in country. But what we are lacking of, it's maybe the larger awareness. And I know that Yerevan Press Club and also Media Ethics Observatory are working on it very actively with the support of different also donors. But it's still very important to make it a little bit more serious, to take it on a higher level. And that's why the recognition of this system, which doesn't mean that government should become a part of that system. And this is very important to try to separate these two systems from each other. So regulation and self-regulation. And even if we are talking about the co-regulation, which is the system which exists in many European countries also, like specifically in the Northern European countries. So even the co-regulation as a concept should be very carefully used here in Armenia. So I don't know if I answered your question. There are a lot of problems and a lot of controversies in case of the mechanism which could be used, but this is the way which we trying to go.
Let's hear from Marietta about the state side of it, I guess, right? And the development of the law from how you've been doing that.
Good evening, everyone. I'm very honored to be here to discuss the topic of media self-regulation in Armenia, and I want to just represent to you recent changes, reforms, and upcoming plans that we have in Armenia regulations concerning mass media. I just want to say that government, state is not trying to be involved in self-regulation system. We are just trying to just make a good framework, legal framework for media self-regulation recognition. And I want to present you the whole process of drafting this legislative package, and the process is very open. And in order to represent you the whole process, I just have taken the notes, and just let me to read it for you. In a modern democracy, the media is essential in a political, social, economic, and cultural life. Highlighting the importance of mass media in democracy, the government of Republic of Armenia has outlined a series of initiatives in its 2021 to 2026 action plan. The main aim of this initiative is to establish a legal framework for regulation mass media. It aims to guarantee objectivity and diversity in the information shared with the public. Media self-regulation helps to create responsible press. It allows media organizations to set their own rules and make sure they follow them. The initiative aims to increase journalists' responsibility, reduce disinformation and harmful content, promote ethics, and build professional integrity. As a part of this event, the Ministry of Justice held several meetings with media representatives to discuss the primary aspects of the media self-regulation concept. Moreover, in April of 2022, a memorandum of cooperation was signed involving the Ministry of Justice, the Standing Committee of the National Assembly, and the Freedom of Speech Protection Committee representing the journalist community. The memorandum aims to create and support a shared policy for media and information development. It includes plans to reform media laws and draft new legal acts based on these changes. The Ministry of Justice of Armenia developed the institutional strengthening of the mass media self-regulation system concept node, and in December of 2022, the Ministry requested an expert review of the concept node from the Council of Europe. Based on the expert feedback, discussions were held with the media representatives, NGOs, and parliament members. These discussions resulted in a comprehensive legislative package which was made available for public discussion in November 2023. So the legislative package includes redefining mass media and several other notions in this law and creating a legal framework to support self-regulation. It proposes regulations that grant official recognition and state-guaranteed benefits to media outlets that follow an effective self-regulation regulatory system in Armenia. The ultimate goal is to establish a fully independent media council, free from state involvement. This council would bring together media organizations and their self-regulation systems into a collective structure. In June 2024, the Ministry of Justice requested the Venice Commission's opinion on the draft legislative package. Overall, the Venice Commission has provided a positive opinion, but also offering valuable recommendations for improvement. The legislative package. Their key recommendations are on notions that we are using in our law, for example, journalist or mass media, etc. So the package is still under discussion with plans for further improvements. This is the whole process that I want to represent you. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward for your insights and thoughts. Thank you once more.
Thank you. We'd like to hear from Susan about some of the Irish example and how that developed, the difference between the council and what the ombudsman person does, and how that's been working. So we'd like to hear some background on that.
Okay, well, it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to be in Armenia. I think that we have certain key things in common, Ireland and Armenia, and one of them is a recognition through our history of the precariousness of democracy and also of the preciousness of democracy. And the reason why press councils and press ombudspersons are important is because they uphold primarily democracy and they uphold the rights and responsibilities of the media within democracies. So it's a hugely important form of accountability in terms of that the media holds the state to account and the public hold the media to account. So it's a good system. The system was set up in Ireland in 2007 because we had at that time a fairly authoritarian Minister for Justice who was sounding as if he was intending to introduce state regulation for the print media. It's important to say that in Ireland we do have state regulation for the broadcast media. So my role is solely for print and online publications, not for broadcasters. And of course, that becomes complicated because all of our genres are blending and melding these days. Anyway, the Press Council was set up in 2007 as a self-regulatory body. It declares itself to be independent of the state and independent of the industry. Both of those can be questioned, but fundamentally they are true. The reason why you have to have state regulation in order to have self-regulation is because people have rights. People have the right to their good name. People have European rights in terms of their privacy. People enjoy certain rights which they can go to court to defend. So if you have a press council, you have the right to hear those complaints without it having to go to court. So therefore we have privilege, we have legal privilege, we can hear complaints, we can deal with complaints, we can offer an alternative to going to court. That is a huge advantage to the media because as anybody knows who has ever had to have any dealings with cases brought against them as journalists, it starts to become incredibly expensive from the minute you get a legal letter from someone making a complaint. You have to employ lawyers, they have to answer, even if the case never gets to court. In these times of impoverished publications, you could be wiped out by a legal case. And in Ireland, unfortunately, we are a notorious country for very, very high awards for defamation. So people will come to Ireland from other countries to bring legal cases because it is known that the awards are very high. So it's a very good way of offering the public a way to intervene in democracy. And it's a very good way of calling the bluff of people who say that there is nothing in the media, in what they call the state-sponsored media or whatever form of insult they wish to put upon it. If they're going to say it's nothing but falseness, then here is a code. Ask them to complain, ask them to say, where is the falsehood in this? Where is it unfair? Where does it invade your privacy? Where does it disrupt your right to a family life? All of those things.
What kinds of results have you seen over the years? Has there been decreases in people making media complaints, increases? How have they been settled? How many go on to court or have the appeals process and things like that?
Yeah, you can't deny people the right to go to court. It's your constitution and legal right to take a legal case if you want. But what we say is you can't take a legal case while you're undergoing the process of making a complaint to the press ombudsman. So it means that people defer that And then if they still want to go to court, like if, for example, I find in their favour, they might think, well, that will help me, I can bring a case to court. But the good thing from the newspapers and online publications point of view is that a judge will look at the fact that they have been to the Press Council, that the paper or publication has submitted to being regulated, and they will probably take that into consideration in being favourable towards the publication. So it's a protection for newspapers if someone does take a case to court, but you can't stop people taking cases. We get a very broad range of complaints. Some of them are from indignant people who think that the world owes them a desperate apology at every turn. And those are difficult complaints to deal with, and you do have a certain amount of serial complainants. But you also get people who feel that they have been very seriously wronged and that their lives have been seriously disrupted by something that has been published. And they have a right to make complaints. You also get people who feel that a court report has ended up damaging their lives because it has removed their privacy, for example. And that can often happen, say, if people are photographed going in and out of court, or say if children are seen to be going in and out of court and they are photographed. So those kind of questions arise. You can also have cases where a newspaper report which reports on a court case is perfectly fine, but headlines are used which give a misleading impression of what the court case found. So there's all sorts of ways in which publications can be found to have breached the code. But I think the key thing about the Press Council's code is that it's very brief. I'll show you just the little leaflet which we use, which is tiny. You know, this contains all of the principles. And they're very simple, straightforward principles, and it's very hard to argue with most of them. You know, principle one is truth and accuracy. You know, truth and accuracy encompasses concepts like disinformation and misinformation, even though that language is so far not used in the Irish Code, but it may well be introduced to it. The second principle is distinguishing fact and comment. You can't just make wild comments. They have to be based on a factual background, but you do have a lot of latitude to make comment. Ireland respects the right of the press to make strenuous commentary. Number three is fair procedures and honesty. You have to show if there's any sort of conflict of interest behind a publication. Respect for rights, privacy, protection of sources, extremely important no matter where you are. If you're going to have people giving you stories, you need to be able to reassure them that you will not give up their names. This comes up a lot. Police are constantly trying to get publications to release their photographs to give an account of who they were speaking to. It's very, very important to protect that. Court reporting, I'll come back to court reporting. Prejudice is a very important principle. The press shall not publish material intended or likely to cause grave offence or stir up hatred against an individual or group on the basis of race, religion, nationality, colour, ethnic origin, membership of the travelling community, gender, sexual orientation, marital status, disability, illness or age. So you can see that that fits in with international human rights law. Children, it's obviously very important that the press don't mess up children's lives. Reporting of suicide, there's a lot of evidence that the wrong sort of reporting of suicide can result in copycat suicide, so the code respects that. And then the final one is publication of the decision of the Press Ombudsman, and that's the only sanction that we in fact have, but it is one that the publications respect. Nobody wants to be found to have been found responsible. I said I would come back to court reporting, and court reporting is one of the areas where I have very limited rights to intervene, because the Irish Constitution calls upon the press to be the eyes and ears of the public, and that is very much insisted upon by editors. So really I can only find that a publication has erred in relation to a court report if they have obviously reported unfairly or inaccurately on the proceedings. So I've looked at your code, and it seems to me that the principles are very, very similar. I think the key difference with ours is that it is very much stripped back. So it's very fundamental principles, and it's then up to me as ombudsperson to interpret those in terms of what I think the public's understanding of those concepts are at this point. So, for example, people today expect a lot more respect for their human rights than would have been the case 20 or 30 years ago. People who are, say, members of the travelling community or people who are migrants have the right to insist that they are not treated in a defamatory way in Irish law and in the Press Council Code. So I'm kind of like a national editor as such. I define what is meant by certain words and principles at this moment. Now, people can appeal my decisions to the Press Council, but there it stops. There is no further state intervention or anything like that. So I think sometimes people misunderstand self-regulation. They think, why does the state have to be involved if it's self-regulation? But it's the state has got to allow the press to regulate itself, but then they have to be told to back off. You know, and in Ireland we have in the past had very heavy-handed state regulation of the broadcasting. For example, during what's known as the Troubles in the north, known very euphemistically as the Troubles in the north of Ireland, where I'm from, we had a stage where spokespersons for certain political parties were not actually allowed to broadcast. So we know that states can get heavy-handed. You know, they can obviously go much worse than that, but that was how it was manifested in our country.
Right. Thank you very much for that. So we have a question from the audience, and so the English questions come through my phone. I'm not checking my Yandex pizza delivery when I'm checking this. So one of the questions, I think this is for Nune, about what are some of the dysfunctions and some of the problems today in the Armenian media landscape and journalism landscape?
Only one problem? I don't think so. I think that the biggest problem is a lack of resources. I think that my colleagues would agree that it's a really serious problem for almost all media outlets, and this is bringing an additional problems when you don't have enough people, when you not only don't have enough money, but also you don't have enough people, which means that you can't execute enough function, which means that you are not fully applying the mechanism of accountability and also the full mechanism of informing public, etc., etc. So all this together is becoming a closed circle, and of course it's problematic. So maybe from my point of view, this is one of the biggest problems. The second one, which I already mentioned in another context, in the context of the self-regulation, I think that the polarization in media, which is, again, in my opinion, it's just a reflection of the polarization in society. And this is not the purely Armenian problem, because we actually see, even if we are following the elections in Moldova, in United States, in Georgia, when we see what's going on in Syria, and in many other countries, we see that the world is polarized right now. And of course, media as a, let's say, the mirror of the all problems, mirror of the societal mood, it should reflect that also. That's why you never know what's the first. Media, who is polarized, and that's why influenced public and polarized public more, or polarized public, which is influenced the information about itself in the media. So, but it's absolutely clear that these both substances are very connected. So polarization of media in Armenia is bringing a lot of other problems also, particularly coming back to self-regulation and this draft law. Some media outlets just doesn't want even to discuss this law, doesn't want to talk about that, because they think that this is a possible way of the government to influence them. But I think that the participation of the NGOs in this process and our permanent call to our colleagues from the media outlets to be the part of this discussion, which is not always successful, but at least we are trying to do that all the time. I think that this is the kind of optional guarantee, at least, do not harm media and the media freedom and the freedom of expression. Because to keep this system voluntarily, to keep the system in a way where no media should be somehow violated in their rights only because of the self-regulation system will be applied as a part of the, at least mentioned in the law, let's say. This is something which is very important for all this process and will be very important also for the law, which is still in a draft, and it should be also very participatory. And the system which is suggested by the NGOs and somehow agreed by our colleagues in the parliament and government, at least on this level, with maybe some disagreements, of course, but still we are coming to some compromise. This is very multi-layer system, which could be complicated a little bit, but at least it gives to all stakeholders a freedom to unite around any kind of self-regulation idea, to be together with other media outlets, to be the part of the existing media ethics observatory, to elect ombudsmen as a part of their team or for the group of the different media outlets. So it really gives a lot of flexibility and freedom, which makes maybe the system a little bit complicated. And then after some period, which we call transitional period, altogether from the ground should start to think about creation on a voluntarily and basis and altogether something which could be called a press council. Okay. This is a very simplified, maybe, explanation of the scheme which is suggested as a part of this future law, let's say, I hope.
Yeah, thank you for that. So one of the questions that came in relates to very much what you were just talking about. You know, given the Irish example, it is self-regulatory, the state is not involved. So the question was, why does the state have to be involved in this? And I think a corollary to that is the incentives, as Susan, you mentioned, even in the Irish example, the incentives for the state are to get involved, to dominate, to control. So for Marietta, what kinds of safeguards in Armenia do you think that there are with the current government or the ministries that would kind of help mitigate some of those incentives or some of those dynamics that might make the state want to get involved and kind of change the nature of this?
So the regulations that we have are very specific regulations, and they are very, very delicate regulations because we do not have any responsibilities for anyone in these regulations. We just give notions, and we give very short regulations concerning a media council. And there is no specific responsibilities and regulations for media council in the low level, because we mostly leave it for media council in the future to give these regulations in its own documents, in its own regulations. So we just try to mention in our mass media law that we have in Armenia now a self-regulation system and self-regulation body, which is a media council. I think today we need to do it in a low level because we have problem with public trust. Also, we have problems with media representatives. We have already mentioned that we have a body which can be a self-regulation body, but with these days public trust, we may have problems in the process of joining that body. That is why we just need to mention in our law that we have this system and we have this body. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We've got time for, we actually have some really good questions. We must have some journalists in the audience here, so you're making my job very easy. I'll try to kind of combine some of these questions that tie into something that I did want to ask Susan anyway. In the press council, you don't have bloggers, for example, that are listed as members and things, right? So it's all established media outlets. And some of these questions all tie into this issue. Roughly, how do you define a journalist is one question that we're not going to answer in 3 minutes. But also, what role does the social media, Telegram channels, independent blogs, does that have a role in what you see for the Irish example? If so, why? If not, why not?
I'm going to do that journalist thing of answering a different question first. I think it's really important to say that in Ireland we only have one code and there's only one ombudsperson and there's only one press council. The state could allow for other press councils or other ombudspersons, but it doesn't, and it's understood that it won't, so long as the press council that currently exists continues to do what it does. And I think it seems to me, I mean, obviously I'm not trying to tell Armenia how to do what it does, because you've got your own obviously well-founded reasons for wanting to do it differently, but it will make it very complicated if there are a lot of different media outlets using different systems. So that's why I said we keep our code very, very stripped back. It's very simple. It's very hard to argue with the principles that are in there, so people sign up to that. And if someone makes a complaint to the paper, it is taken to the press council as being about the publication. We don't deal with complaints about individual journalists unless it's a question of a particular journalist's behaviour, like if a particular journalist, say, has doorstepped a person and invaded their privacy or something. But most of the time it's the publisher that's held responsible, and I think that's really important. It means individual journalists don't end up getting, victimised by maybe bad actors in this regard. Okay. So the question about individual bloggers and so on, I think the media landscape is changing, and the Press Council in Ireland is going to have to take note of that. Just recently we have been getting applications for membership from very small publications and from individuals and small publications using, say, for example, Substack. But on the whole, the Press Council deals with the bigger publications. All of the main publications in Ireland are members, as are almost all of the online publications. But it's something that obviously has to be constantly regarded because, as everybody in the industry knows, it's just changing constantly. I think it would be really a very, very bad development if people stopped respecting the profession of journalism and stopped respecting that journalists are skilled, trained people who know the law and who know how to behave themselves in a courtroom and who know how to behave themselves when they deal with members of the public. There are people in Ireland who call themselves journalists now who simply do not respect people.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I thought this was very informative, very interesting. We're out of time. There's going to be the next panel after this, so thank you, everybody.
The panel will be moderated by Dan Perry, a communication professional and world affairs analyst. And this panel features incredible lineup of panelists: Corina Chepoy, Chief of Party Media Program in Armenia, Internews; Mariam Gogosashvili, former Executive Director of the Georgian Charter of Journalistic Ethics; Seda Muradian, President of the Public Journalism Club; and Andrianik Shirinyan, Country Representative for Freedom House in Armenia. Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gaene. Not being a university professor, I haven't memorized what I want to say, so you'll have to forgive the computer here. So my name is Dan Perry. I spent about 28 years at the Associated Press. I was the director for Europe, Africa, and Middle East. at various times, but now I have a publication on Substack. So it struck me when I heard Susan talk about this issue, because I can't see anyone regulating anyone who publishes via blogs and stuff. And this directly relates to the issue of disinformation, which I'll just set up for a second. It's not just an abstract problem of complex words with Latin roots. It is a crisis with profound real-world consequences. It erodes trust in institutions, it fosters confusion, it amplifies societal divisions, and it's been used both by internal agents of chaos, some of whom end up getting elected president in various countries, but also by outside players. For example, Russia just tried to mess with the Romanian election via what could be called disinformation, and the result was they canceled the election. In the first such reaction to disinformation I've ever seen. Well, so when we talk about self-regulation, the implication is that this is among established media organizations. And traditionally, the serious ones can be expected at least to serve as a trusted gatekeeper of information. Filtering out falsehoods and providing context, that's difficult enough, especially in developing democracies and obviously in non-democracies. But the problem today has been vastly compounded, I say, by social media. These platforms, with their algorithms that reward virality over truth, I think, have become the dominant purveyors of disinformation, of emotional and sensational and misleading content that spreads faster than ever, while nuanced and fact-based reporting struggles to compete for attention. And of course, the fact that the moving of the audience to social media relates to the fact that newsrooms face shrinking budgets, reduced investigative capacity, and mounting pressures from a 24/7 news cycle. So combating disinformation is not helped by any of that. So we have a vicious cycle. The damage caused by this disinformation ecosystem is staggering. Polarization and radicalization, elevating populists and extremists who exploit falsehoods for political gain. It's created a climate of anger and mistrust and dissatisfaction where facts are devalued and every issue becomes a battleground in this environment. It's easy to see why public confidence in the media and therefore even in democracy itself has suffered. So my main point really is, in this environment where disinformation is in a twisted way aligned with the market, because the public responds to it, in the hyper-democracy of social media, what can we really do? Can you fight disinformation that seems to have a willing audience? Can you fight disinformation when the polarization itself has caused great disagreements on the very question of what is truth, which is another way of saying, what is information? I would hope that some of our panelists might address themselves to what I think is that fundamental challenge. But now I'll stop talking and let's turn to our panel, who truly is excellent. Let's start with Karina. Try to frame for us how Armenia fits into this global problem. I know you've been studying the Armenian news media, but given what I've just been saying about social media, what are the major channels distributing falsehoods in Armenia? Would successfully implemented self-regulation mechanisms actually impact whoever is most responsible for spreading rumors and falsehoods?
I think Armenia might be part of the global trends, let's put it this way, where we see that most of falsehoods are actually present on social networks, especially in those that are closed. Of course, there is also biased media or influenced media that belongs to, let's say, certain powers. But I think because of the rising numbers in social media usage, the danger is there, especially where we cannot moderate or we cannot self-regulate in any way. Most of the media here actually signed that ethical code, even if they might not be following it all the time. There is still a rule and they participate and they discuss it. But I think the danger comes from the platforms that do not adhere to that. And also we see in some of the countries of the region, when they try to include the self-regulatory mechanism integrated into the state system and cover that also for the influencers, let's put it this way, there is a huge backlash. So I don't know how successfully that can be done. It's a lot of unknowns, I'm sorry to say, but you know, that's the reality that we live today. We have to adapt very quickly.
So to follow up, would you say that any attempt to establish a code of ethics or to regulate in any way, self-regulated or whatever regulated, do you think that should include the non-traditional media? Bloggers and even my daughters who publish on Facebook, the same as the New York Times.
I think we cannot impose it. We should give the opportunity for content creators to sign up to these rules that are valid for any type of platform, I think, and any type of content, and only promote professionalism and good standards and lack of hate speech and reliability of information. But definitely this cannot be a rule that fits all. Surely not.
Thank you. You know, Mariam, you're from Georgia, and you've seen some regression, I'm afraid to say, in your country. Did disinformation play a role in that somehow?
Hello. First of all, I would like to thank you for hosting us. It's a very important issue. About your question, I think that like in Armenia and Georgia, we also have a lot of disinformation. And I'm sure that we can handle it under the self-regulation, not regulation, because it's difficult to regulate physical persons. And we all know that most of the disinformation spreads in social networks by the physical persons. So you mentioned that we cannot go and regulate your daughter, right? But I think that state should think about the working plans and create some policies how to deal with disinformation. But it should not be a regulation of media outlets itself. Because countries like Georgia and Armenia, we are countries in democratic transition. And government, I've seen how government is using any regulations against freedom of expression and freedom of speech. Therefore, it's important to work to strengthen self-regulatory mechanisms or co-regulation mechanisms, at least co-regulation mechanisms. You know that Georgia adopted EU directive about the audiovisual media service in 2022. And for broadcasters, we have now co-regulation. But for online media and newspapers, still a self-regulation works. So what is, I think that raise awareness among not just society, but also among the journalists is also very important, because our main power is to build a trust in media. And today there is a lack of trust because of the polarization, because the reasons you already mentioned, I don't want to repeat. But we should provide information and raise awareness among the journalists that how important is it to work with the accuracy, accountability, and also why this principles is so important for them, because it builds trust in media, and this is the main tool against disinformation, a powerful tool, because in this digital era, people get information from social media networks mostly, and when they would like to find out the background of the story, find out the whole story, they should go to the trustful media outlet and not just believe in what was posted in some Facebook pages. I will stop here if you have any questions. Sorry.
Well, I mean, I know you wanted to talk about the ethics of a journalist, and I suppose you just did. You are saying that the journalists should have these ethics.
Yes, journalists should have this ethics, but unfortunately, due to some reasons, they don't work under the ethical standards. Of course, I'm not talking about everyone, but mostly because of this critical political polarization, and because lack of resources, sometimes there are some violations of ethical standards. But journalists who prioritize ethical standards and openly correct the false information, I think they build trust in media.
Yeah, look, I mean, I hate to sound cynical for someone who spent almost all their career as a journalist, and of course I agree with you, but I have to wonder how we address the challenge reflected in what I think is the fact that much of the audience might say they want that, but they don't respond like they want that. In other words, the very serious media that does everything you said does not tend to be the best-selling media. And because media is mostly a business, the result is almost inevitable. It kind of seems like we have to ask certain things of the public more than of the journalists.
Yeah, I agree that sensationalism is very popular now. But I always mention when people blame to media that say don't follow the ethical standards, that we should grow up together, audience and the media outlets.
So let's turn to Seda. You've had this very extensive experience, both as a journalist and an anchor, editor, but then as a sort of a student of the profession, and you've seen the transition to this digital age and its hyper-democratization. And I know that you have an interest in the mental health of journalists as well. Give us your perspective.
First of all, thank you for this opportunity, and congratulations on putting together this really important event. And it's a really important conversation and dialogue. We live in an era where we are exposed to trauma quite often, and traumatic events are quite intense. And the volume of trauma journalists, media workers, and our societies perceive and consume is uncomparable. And according to our needs assessment of media workers in Armenia, and also needs assessment of mental health that we conducted among displaced media workers of Nagorno-Karabakh, we understood that trauma plays quite an important role in the context of professional integrity and also motivation to work as a journalist, to grow professionalism and to continue to be capacitated as much as possible. And the uniqueness of traumatized media sector in Armenia also relates to the fact that we have been covering our own tragedy and not the tragedy of others or stranger people. We have been covering tragedies of Armenians. We have seen the defeat, killings, and all other horrific things that were happening in 2020 and afterwards. We have witnessed the forced displacement, ethnic cleansing of Armenians, and these events they are very often internalized by journalists because many journalists and media content producers think that it's their own duty to internalize this trauma. But the internalized trauma impacts professionalism a lot. I also work as an editor from time to time because I work with working journalists who receive small fundings from our public journalism club to produce media content. And I often bump into the challenges of this jeopardized professionalism because of the traumatized journalist, because very often media content producers start to identify themselves as one of the victims or as one of the members of the victims, and these processes impact also professionals in the context of objectivism, in the context of fact-checking, and as a result, sort of a manipulative content or emotionally impacted content is produced.
So you're saying they feel so much a part of the story.
Yeah.
That's the trauma, that they're part of the story, that they are derelict in their journalistic duty to not take sides and to not pass on maybe disinformation that serves one side. And so this kind of journalist is less likely to be ethically, objectively fighting disinformation.
And there is a clear connection between, like Nunes said, what was the first, right? So the traumatized journalists are traumatizing their readers, and vice versa. The traumatized audience is also having a huge impact on the way journalists want to cover certain stories. This circle continues to exist in post-Exodus period in Armenia, and in order to tackle these challenges, as an organization, we suggested to integrate mental health support mechanisms and mental health well-being into self-regulation and into internal protocols of media companies.
Should that be in any way encouraged by the state or baked into the law?
I think state could support probably by some resources because in order to institutionalize these mental health support mechanisms, of course, media companies need to have resources. There are certain procedures or protocols that could be conducted, of course, without any additional financial resources. But if we are dealing with trauma and we are dealing with mental health therapies, then of course you need to have financial resources. And as it was said, our media landscape lacks institutional support from international donors and lacks financial resources because the market is too small. But I should also say that one of the recommendations that we developed in our guidelines, Public Journalism Club, with the support of Internews in Armenia media program, is that the protocols and internal regulations should have a preventive character and should enable media managers to not to deal with trauma afterwards, but to prepare their team, to prepare themselves, and to prevent their journalists to be traumatized.
Let's turn to Andronik. Freedom House prepared a paper last year entitled Armenia's Fight Against Disinformation. I'd ask you to tell us a little bit about its findings, how they might relate to the current effort to establish self-regulation, if there's any actionable concrete points that you'd like to recommend. I also wonder if you found Armenia has a distinctive problem with any aspect of it that's causing disinformation, or in general that requires regulation. Seda was suggesting it does because of all this bad news, but I'm kind of thinking, I'm identifying that kind of trauma in other countries, like maybe the United States. Maybe mental health is not uniquely a problem to Armenia. What do you think?
Thank you, Dan. And I do have to agree with you that disinformation is a global issue, but I think it affects all of us differently because we all come from different contexts. And in Armenia, the past 6 years have been quite difficult and tumultuous because we had the revolution in 2018, and then since 2020 we are living in a crisis situation, and last year we had an ethnic cleansing. So we are dealing with all these crises one after the other that affects all of us individually, but also affects all of us as a community, because we are a society that lives very much as a community. Whatever happens happened in a faraway village in Nagorno-Karabakh affected everyone that was living far away from that, but also the diaspora. So we are a huge community, and I think the Armenian experience is quite distinct, and it requires maybe some solutions that relate to the solutions that worked in the world as well. But I think we have to keep in mind that we are working in a specific context, the Armenian context. When it comes to the disinformation issue, we have been working on it for the past 4 years, and we did publish a policy paper last year about the disinformation strategy that the Armenian government drafted. I think our policy paper, the author of the policy paper was not quite happy with the draft. I think there were many critics about the draft, and the biggest issue that we saw, and I think this is about the many aspects of how Armenia approaches policy making. The issue for us in the specific action plan and then the code was that it didn't include everyone's voices while it was being drafted. We thought that it misses out very important communities while being drafted. There are specific aspects that are not taken into account, and we were speaking about this whole of society approach, which I think is the Swedish example, how you have to include everyone in the fight against disinformation. You have to include the school children, you have to include the parents, the teachers, the lecturers, and this is one of the things that we are doing at Freedom House. With one of our partners, we are going to the communities, to the local communities, because, as I said, we are a nation that lives in a community. We live with our neighbors, with our relatives, everyone knows with each other, we speak with each other, we drink coffee with each other, and then we speak while doing that, and then we share information with our taxi driver, and this is one of the biggest sources of information that people receive. So one of the things that we do, we go to the faraway communities, and I think we have worked in 6 or 7 regions of Armenia. We work with the teachers mostly because we think that teachers are important actors in being these agents of fighting against disinformation, especially in these rural areas, because they are very influential. Again, for our partners, we have established these media and information literacy hubs. And this is the sustainability element, because unfortunately projects end, but the work should continue. So through these hubs, we are trying to continue working with the communities, because again, I think we have to go to the root causes. I think the answer to all of the question is inside of this building, the education. Right. And when we work through education, when we work with teachers, schools, universities, I think this is not the fastest, probably the slowest way, but the most comprehensive way of solving the issues.
You're looping back to what was said before, that educating the public to reject disinformation and to identify and to care about it is critical in a marketplace. Let me ask some questions that have come in here. Do any of you know of changes that have actually been implemented in the draft law after the Venice Commission's opinion? It seems like so nothing. We don't know of any actual change coming.
The information that I have that it's being discussed at the ministry now. I have to say that, I mean, I understand the ministry has been going on through a lot the past weeks. There was a change of the minister, there was a change of the whole cabinet at the ministry. So I think they have been preoccupied with other stuff, but the information that I have is that there are going to be some changes.
Here's another question that I think relates equally to both panels. When addressing disinformation issues, how can we escape labeling social media resources and essentially idealizing the mainstream media as the only instance of truth and information? It comes down, I guess, to the other thing we're dancing around. When so much information is coming not from mainstream media, how can you escape this? And should the law somehow address itself to this?
I think it's already too late because this social media and also the intervention of media content produced with AI tools is becoming quite big and dominant. And also I remember that about 6 months ago, I think, there was a conference where local media companies, it was the Media Initiative Centers conference, where Armenian local media companies were presenting their experiences with media content production through AI tools. And even globally, internationally, the AI tools integration was not that much welcomed, was not considered as professionalism. But in 6 months, things changed so rapidly that it's inevitable already not to consider these developments and the phenomenon of AI that brings changes into media production, and also the impact of AI on disinformation, dissemination, and also production of media content that is manipulative or we already here locally in Armenia bumped into certain cases.
Visuals that are deep fakes.
Deep fakes. We already have several cases of deep fakes that became quite popular and were circulated actively. So it's, I think it's a really impossible now to provide a recipe or to elaborate because things are evolving quite rapidly, quite fast. And media organizations or those that are in the development sector are too slow. We are too, there are certain things that make us slow.
Like most organizations?
But please.
Karina, I see you wanted to...
Yes, I realized that we cannot avoid scrutinizing social networks because I look at the examples, most recent ones, as you mentioned, Romania and Moldova, both of my countries, and I'm really worried about what will happen in 2016 elections because we've seen the misuse of social media by external forces to influence elections and thus also jeopardizing the governance and the society and the democracy per se. And then people would doubt also the credibility of elections if they can be influenced so easily, just by mailing everyone a credit card, let's say. I mean, it's actually happening in hundreds of thousands. So we have to be aware of that. And I think the role of the government also comes in here, not only of watchdogs and credible media and credible influencers, those exist, thank God.
Well, we have like a 2-minute warning here. I'm getting the alert. So we're about to wrap up, but based on what you just said, I wonder, on a number of occasions, people have spoken of the role of the government, the duty of the government. One of the questions that came in is, might some media organizations want to have nothing to do with the fund created by the government or incentives to abide by self-regulation and to be good journalists, or anything to do with coming out of a law that the government passed? Might news organizations just run away from all of this for fear of being seen as somehow in league with the government?
They might actually. We see that funds that are being created by governments, media support funds, specifically again by governments, some media actually say no, and I'm not talking about Armenia, it's international practice, because of fear of being labeled. But again, in a very narrow advertising environment, how do you survive then? Why don't you use public money? It's taxpayers' money in the end, this government money, right? So we have to discuss that and consider that.
A final word from each of you, maybe a sentence or two.
Local organizations and media companies are quite happy when receiving taxpayers' money from other governments. So, you know, USAID, US Embassy, EU, etc., right? So I think we have to work with the media community and to discuss, explain more. There is a resistance towards this fund, like possible fund, future fund, and also the participation of the government in this fund. But you know, the media companies already receive from other governments fundings.
I guess it comes down to whether you trust the government.
Yeah.
Mariam?
Georgia. I think that it depends what country you are coming from. Because in Georgia, if you get money from the government fund, it means that government will ask you something to return. So even Georgian Charter of Journalistic Ethics was one, the president suggested to provide the funds, but our members refused because we don't know. We should be critical to the government as well, and we don't know if we take even one gel, no one will believe that you are objective. It's also about the media literacy and the audience, how they will get this information that you are getting
Perception.
money from. Yes, so how that you are getting money from the government. I know that some media outlets getting money from other countries' taxpayers, but it's quite difficult.
I believe that's illegal now in Georgia, right? Or about to
It's
be.
legal, but you are foreign agent.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Last words of wisdom?
Just want to say that I was just informed that there have been many changes to the existing law, and it's already passed down to some of our colleagues, and they are working on it. When it comes to the funding issue, I think it's okay if some media organizations don't want to take the government money. I think we live in a democracy and everyone has the right to do whatever they want to do, but I think the media should think about sustainability element. And you know, grants and donors are one of the ways of solving the issue of funding, but there should be some sustainable solutions to this. But also this is the responsibility of us as consumers of media, how to support this sustainability. I know, and we had these discussions many times, there is no culture of, you know, crowdfunding in Armenia, and I guess in Georgia as well. There is no culture of donating money, because these are the cultures that exist in certain countries that have a certain level of well-being, and unfortunately we are not one of those countries, but I think we have to work in that direction, and there are some medias in Armenia that started some, you know, small entrepreneurships, and they are trying to solve some issues, and of course this is not going to be to solve it, but at least there are some steps being taken. I think the media self-regulation in itself of course, it's not going to solve the issue as well. It's going to be one of the tools in the toolbox against the fight against disinformation and developing human-centric media in our country. But I think it's an important step. I think this is an important step, important signal to the media organizations, and also an important demand from the public as well, that we do require a certain level of ethics while reporting about the issues that concern all of us. And disinformation in itself is a democracy issue. And we have to wait and see how the government responds to these initiatives. And if there is an opening of fund, if they are requiring medias to, publish certain article that they want to, then it means that we are living in a very flawed democracy, and we are very delusioned about the state of things that we are in. And of course, it's very flawed, the democracy in Armenia, but there's also huge progress.
So would one of your action points, takeaways be not to make sure that nothing in this law or in the procedure smacks of government rewards too much or demands of certain things?
We absolutely made sure that the law is as liberal it can be, and there will be minimum intervention from the government side. Because again, the democracy in Armenia is flawed. It's not an institutional democracy. And we have to take things into account that governments change. And that's the thing. We have to keep in mind that democracy is an everyday process, and we might have a government that doesn't believe in democratic values, so we have to be as liberal as possible when drafting these laws.
Of course. I guess, Karina, you get the final word. Ultimul cuvânt.
Mulțumesc. So, just to continue, the suggestion of an endowment, I think, would be the most suitable for a source of funding that would be a fund and from which the media could exist, at least partially. Also answering the question that we have on the screen, it is a partial answer, and it is an answer to some of the problems, but not to all of them. I think that's the realistic, if you'd ask me for the last word, I would say that.
It's no mean feat to even have a partial answer. Well, thank you very much. This has been a great panel, and the other one was great as well, and it's been quite an honor, and thank you all for coming.